Hey, this is Victor Antonio, author, speaker, sales trainer. Welcome to this mini workshop on how buyers buy. Now, in today's market, we have to agree that the client is more informed than they used to be. Like back in the day, we had all the information, but you fast forward, we have the internet, we have all this content out there that clients today are more informed than ever. I would say somewhere 60, 70, maybe even 80% into the buying cycle. What does that mean? It means that they're well informed. So when they come to your establishment, your retail store, guess what? They already know a lot about what they want. So let's really try to understand how buyers buy, why they don't buy, what holds them back, and then what you can do to sell more effectively. Now, when I say sell more effectively, hold on. I'm not saying, that high pressure sales. We don't do that anymore because high pressure selling simply doesn't work in today's market. So we have to find a way to really connect with the buyer. So first, let's understand what's going through a buyer's head when they first walk in, let's say to your retail store, right? In other words, here's a good model to keep in mind. If you want to understand buying, it's really simple. Think of this as a balance scale, right? On this side, you have certainty, right? That side of the scale. On this side of the scale, you have anxiety. This is the sales process in a nutshell. When a customer walks in, there's probably a high level of anxiety and a low level of certainty of what they actually want to buy. Put yourself in that position, right? You're going to go into a jewelry store, for example. You're going to buy, let's say, a wedding ring, right? Or maybe some type of gift or award, whatever it might be for somebody. But let's say it's a wedding ring. And you're walking in, you're going to buy a ring, and you're like, there's a high degree of anxiety because you don't know what to buy. You don't know what the right one is, which means your certainty is very low. Anxiety is very high. When anxiety is high, certainty is low, nobody's buying anything, right? Now, even when you have an equal amount of certainty and anxiety, guess what? The buyer's not going to make a buying decision. There's still that a little bit of both, right? What we want to do is to really drive the anxiety down and the certainty of the decision they're making. We want to drive that up. That's the goal. In any sales situation, in any exchange with a potential buyer, our job is to lower anxiety, increase their certainty in what they're going to buy. Now, with that framework in mind, with that mindset, that our job is to, again, lower anxiety, increase certainty, the question then becomes, well, how do you do that, Victor? And how do you do it easily? That's why we're here. Let me go ahead and erase the board here. I want to share with you what I call a 3-step process to how to engage a customer, right? And really with the end goal, again, I'm repeating myself for effect here, is to lower anxiety, increase certainty. So step number one in any engagement is to first empathize. Let's just call it empathy. Let's talk about empathize with your customer. Now, what does that mean, empathize with your customer? When you meet somebody for the first time, again, anxiety levels are very high. So one of the first things we want to do is be very attentive, right? So one of the things I like to talk about is how do you begin to identify who you're talking to? It's always interesting, right? When you meet somebody for the first time, who are you talking to? Now, there's 4 types, and I use an acronym to identify the person I'm talking to, because once I identify who I'm talking to, I can adjust my conversation style to that person's personality. Now, this is my version of a personality profile. I have an acronym called SAAD, SAD, right? There's 4 types of people that you're going to meet. The first one is a very social person. This is a person that walks in and they just talk. They just love talking. These are people who are easy to engage with, right? Very social, very how you doing, very open, very forthright. Again, the conversation just flows easily. Rare do we find this person, though. It'd be great if they were all buyers were like this, but this is a rare person. If they're social, the conversation just flows because they're very open. They start the conversation back and forth. Let's move over to the more difficult one. This one right here, I call this one amiable, right? Now, an amiable person, my wife is a perfect example of amiable, very polite, very conscientious, likes to ask a lot of questions, right? This type of person asks a lot of questions and is looking for you to provide very in-depth answers. In other words, when they ask you a question, they're also monitoring how you're responding to their questions. Are you really listening to them? So in other words, this type of person requires you to really focus in on what they want, what they're asking, and what their intentions are. These are usually very friendly people, but again, they're very methodical. You don't want to rush them. They're very paced. They'll ask questions. You'll answer. They'll ask for clarification. And again, that's the type of rhythm. So it's a very methodical, almost purposeful rhythm with this type of person. This you'll see a lot. This one right here, this one's a very analytical person. Analytical people, they slice and dice. By that I mean is they've done a lot of research, and they're going to ask you very technical questions, right? And we'll get into the whole answering questions, but they're going to ask you technical questions. They're going to analyze it almost from the left brain, so to speak, very logical in how they're approaching it. So they'll look at price, they'll look at the type of product they're buying, right? Different categories of diamonds, for example, carats, so forth and so on. They're very analytical. With this type of person, you can't try to be too social because they're and they mean business. They're very, again, left brain. Very logical. So with these people, you want to be very specific. In other words, you want to give them the information they're asking you about. Okay? So again, amiable, we can say, is more of an emotional, intelligent conversation. An analytical person, very logical, right down the middle, just give me the facts, as they say. The last one, again, an outlier, social person or outlier. This one right here, this is a dominating personality. By dominating means they know what they want. They've come into the store and they like to dominate the conversation. Why? Because they've done the research. They know what they want. They just want you to answer specific questions. And again, when you're dealing with a dominant personality, the best way is to obviously be a good listener, but also ask questions. So in other words, they're going to want to dominate the conversation. Instead of trying to correct them, right? What you want to do is ask questions to guide them, to help them clarify their thoughts. So let's go through these again. Social, very friendly, very open. Amiable, lots of questions. Again, your job here is to be very purposeful in answering questions and to take time, not rush through this one. Analytical, left brain, logical, just give me the facts. Dominating people just come in, they know what they want, so just help them with what they want. These are the 4 different personality types. And again, during the empathy stage, again, opening dialogues, we're just having conversation. We just want to figure out who are they, which personality are they. Like that, you can kind of figure out the rhythm. Now, immediately upon engagement, you're going to ask questions, they're going to give you answers. And after a couple, you'll be able to kind of judge who you're dealing with. And then, once you know, adjust accordingly. So, again, a lot of listening going on here, a lot of questions, a lot of analyzing. Keep also in mind, you're looking at them and you're trying to assess which category they're in. But they're also looking at you and they're trying to kind of size you up as well. So keep that in mind. So empathy is big. A lot of questions at the beginning. Take your time. There's a phrase I like to emphasize in sales. You got to slow down to speed up the sale. Let me say that again because I want you to register that. You got to slow down to speed up the sale. What does that mean? Do not rush. Don't try to rush somebody through a process. Take your time, which leads us to the second part of the process. If I've empathized with the customers, I've asked them questions like, why are you buying it? Why are you buying it for? What's the purpose? So forth and so on. I'm trying to understand who the individual is, listening just to kind of understand their end goal. I move to the second phase. And the second phase is, if I understand the customer, if I've empathized with them, if I've taken their point of view because I've really listened to this individual, then the next stage, here's the critical one, is the education piece. Oh, this is so important. The education phase of any conversation is important. So again, imagine somebody walks into your store, right? You've gone through the empathy, you've asked questions, you're listening, you're assessing what type of individual you're dealing with. Next, we move into the education phase where we're going to help them. Now again, customers have a lot of information, right? They've searched online, they have a lot of information. Most people think because they've searched and they have a lot of information, they don't need you. Well, no. For the first time, I think ever, you the salesperson are the ultimate differentiator. You're the differentiator. Why? Because there's so many options out there that customers, although they have a lot of information, they're confused because there's so much information. So our job is to educate them. Now, keep in mind that we need to, again, understand who we're dealing with. right? So let me give you this example, this visual example. Just like I started out that sales is all about certainty and anxiety, we also have to understand that during the educational phase, when we're giving information, sharing information, we have to know who we're dealing with. And here's where a lot of us lose our clients. Imagine for a moment that the height of the person represents how much information they understand. So in other words, this person has this type of IQ, and when I say IQ, I'm referring to product IQ, how much they know, for example, about diamond rings, right? This is their level. That's them, right? This is you, because you're an expert. That means your IQ of a diamond ring is so much higher, right? Up here. Your IQ is way up here. Now notice what happens. There's a gap right here. This is known as information asymmetry. Here's what I mean. Sometimes you know too much, and then because this person's down here in terms of their product IQ, they get lost. Have you ever tried to buy like insurance? I have. And within 5 or 10 minutes, I'm typically just lost because they're using all these complicated terms, all these complicated phrases, things I simply don't understand, right? And that is an example of information asymmetry. The insurance salesperson is up here in terms of understanding insurance, but my brain is down here. And because there's a gap in understanding and them giving me the information, I always wind up saying, you know what, let me think about it. Maybe I shouldn't buy this right now. Let me just think about it some more. And they don't make a decision because they don't understand. When we don't understand something, we simply don't want to make a buying decision. So when somebody, again, comes to your storefront, what we want to do is do two things. One is we want to take time to educate them, walk them through maybe some of the terminology we use, what different types of diamonds mean, right? Or whatever it may be. But at the same time, we need to simplify our language. Now, so we're doing two things here, is that we're educating the buyer as we're talking to them, but we're also simplifying the language. So again, anything you can do to, first of all, take your time to educate them. This means this. When I say this is what it means, right? That's really clarifying language. And sometimes, again, you just have to simplify things. It's not that complicated, Mr. Customer. Think of this as being something like that. It's very simple. And by simplifying language, taking time to educate the buyer, what happens is you close this gap here. And this is what I call the credibility, or should I say the trust gap. Because the more I understand about the product, what you're doing, getting back to this here, you're reducing my anxiety and increasing my certainty. So again, take time to really explain things and educate them, but also simplify language. Avoid acronyms, jargon that is industry specific, and make it very simple so the buyer understands. And once you close this gap, again, you're going to feel their certainty go up, their anxiety go down. Again, only you can determine how to do this. What we're trying to do here is also, let me just erase this. What we're trying to do here in the education phase is something very important, is that we're trying to position ourselves as a subject matter expert. This is big. When you're explaining something, again, the buyer's analyzing you. They're asking you tough questions, right? You ever have a buyer just ask you tough questions? Well, what about this? What about this? Why not this? Why this? Why not this versus that? And what they're looking for are several things. Is that they're actually physically looking at you, right? They're physically looking at you to see how you respond. But more importantly, what you say is important, but how you say it, the vocalization piece is important. Let me slow down because I get excited about this part, because this is where you win or lose a deal. When you're talking to a client, you got to make sure that how you present the content, let's say they ask you a tough question, how you present, how you respond to that question makes all the difference in the world. They're listening to what you're saying, but more importantly, they're listening to how you say it with confidence. You ever ask somebody a tough question, they go, yeah. And you hear that, yeah, that little hesitation? That little hesitation triggers a part of your brain to go, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, which is why it's important, key, that you understand your product, right? You got to be able to respond without hesitation, respond with confidence, because not only are they listening to the verbiage, what you're saying, They're listening to the vocalization, which is how you say it, how you respond. And if you respond with this uncertainty, guess what you trigger? Their anxiety. So you want to respond with that confidence, which is why it's important that you know your product. Now, if we've empathized with the customer, we understand what they're looking for, we understand the type of buying personality they are, step one. Step two is that we educate them. We say, okay, based on what you've said so far, here's what I think I would recommend. Here's some things to look at, and they're going to ask you tough questions. You respond. And again, part of this is to what? Increase their education using simplified language to do so. If we empathize and we take time to educate, then the last part is let me just close it out. The last part is you have to, I'll use the word empower them to make a decision. Now, this is important. Again, going back to the beginning, nobody wants to be pressured into actually buying something, but you can empower them, right? So what does that mean? Let's go through it again slowly. I've empathized with the customer. I understand you. I've asked the right questions. I figure out what you want, what's the occasion, so forth and so on. I also understand your personality style. Then I went over to the educational piece, right? You ask questions, I answer them, so forth and so on, right? For example, if somebody's very amiable, you want to, what? Respond with very purposeful responses, right? Answer that question completely. If someone's analytical, you want to stay left brain, very logical, just the facts. If they're very dominating, well, that personality, let them see what they want, guide them a little bit by asking questions, and that whole engagement, education piece is important. Now, the last part is, as you're moving in, trying to get them to commit, because that's what this is about. How do you get buyers to buy? How do you get them to commit? You have to empower them to make a decision. So here's what I mean by empower. You don't want to force people into anything, right? So what I like to do is offer options. So for example, let me erase this right here. For example, what I typically tell people is that if you offer somebody two options, right? Option one, and let's say option two. This one costs this much, and this is the smaller priced one. When you offer somebody two options, they're typically going to move here, right? That's what we found. Science shows that when you have two offers like this could be 20,000, this could be 10,000, because people are unsure, they'll go with the smaller option, right? That's the brain mitigating risk. That's how our brains work. Now, something interesting happens. If I put a third option here that's much more expensive, this is 30, let's say this is 20, this is 10, the majority of people will always go right here in the middle because they're trying to mitigate risk. This is the way the brain works. Now, if you don't believe me, go to Wendy's, go to Starbucks. They always have three options. Why? Because they know that the majority of people will choose the one in the middle. That's where the biggest profit margin is. This is known as the Goldilocks effect, right? In other words, too hot, too cold, just right. So here's something else to keep in mind. Something interesting. Let me erase this right here. They did an interesting study. They wanted to see if they can move people over price points. Did you know that if I put one here at, let's say, 25,000, because I close the economic distance between these two, which is 5K, most people will consider one of these two options. So just something in terms of psychology. Let's go through the summary real quick. If you offer two options, right, 20, 10, most people will go with the smaller one just to mitigate risk. If you offer three options, people will drop to the one in the middle. But if you move the one in the middle closer to the more expensive one, 25 to 30, this is called a decoy, people will tend to focus on these two and not even look at that. So that's one way of increasing the average price. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm not telling them what they're about to buy. I'm actually empowering them to make a buying decision. But what I want to do, let me just clear this. What I want to do is to make sure that I always offer three options. So let's do a quick summary of all the things we've discussed. Number one, our job, again, there's certainty and anxiety. There's a little scale right there. Our job is to increase their certainty through an education process, giving them great information, reduce their anxiety at the same time. Number two, when they first walk in, what do we want to do? We definitely want to make sure that we empathize with them, right? You want to empathize with them, which means you're going to ask questions. You're going to figure out who you're talking to and really understand the reason, the motivation behind what they're going to buy. Number three, then we want to move into the educational piece. Now, again, this is where we close that uncertainty gap. Remember, simplify your language, take time to educate the buyer, close that credibility trust gap, and they're more likely to buy. Number 4, and that means you empower them by giving them options. So again, as you're talking to a customer, if you understand their needs, because you've empathized with them, during the educational process, you basically showed them all the different options. Now, as we move into the empower piece, your job is to give them, let's say in this case, we do 3 options. Now, let me put a finer point on this as we wrap this up. When you give somebody 3 options, customers are looking for you. Listen to me. They're looking for you to advocate a position. What do I mean by that? The data has shown that customers, again, even when given 3 options, they might go towards the middle, whatever it may be, but maybe you have 4 options. Let's make it complicated. What they want you to do is guide them to advocate a certain position. So in other words, what I mean by that is, if you got 4 options, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can say something like this: Mr. Customer, based on what you've told me, based on the discussion we had during the empathy piece at the beginning, even though we have 4 options, hard to choose from, here's what I would recommend. I would definitely look at these 2 right here, based on price and based on what you need. Here's why. Or you may just say these 2 instead. Let's kind of cross that out. Let's just do these 2 right here. You may say 2 and 3 are probably the 2 best options based on what you want. And if it were mine to do, I would choose this one right here. Keep it in mind, being price sensitive and your budget, right? Because what I want to do is, remember, during the empower piece, I want to make sure, listen to the phrase, I keep their best interest in mind. I'm not trying to sell them. I'm trying to give them the best solution. Again, without thinking about commissions, I'm trying to give them the best solution. And that is it. If you can do this, if I can take the time to really empathize with my customer, right? Educate them, position myself as a subject matter expert, and as I empower them, guide them towards a decision, I keep their best interest in mind, I will be a more successful salesperson, i.e., you will be able to sell more effectively. But what I love about the best interest in mind at the end, that it's a win-win. Our goal is not to sell somebody, it's to serve. And if we serve, in the long run, we're going to get more business. And on that note, this is Victor Antonio, always reminding you that selling ain't hard when you educate, empathy, educate, empower, and dare I say, make sure, if I can close this out correctly, that you always be very engaging throughout the whole process. On that note, I'm out here. Thank you very much for your attention. Hope you enjoyed this.